Hello, my name is James Arroyo, and welcome to Chapter 17, Persuasive Speech. With persuasive speech, there becomes a lot of complication. With informative speech, it's about communicating your ideas clearly and effectively in an organized and structured way. Whereas persuasive speech, it is about influencing the audience to do something or believe something a certain way or to value things in a different way. So there are a lot of complications that come into this process, and when we learn how to better engage with persuasive speeches, it will not only improve our ability of social influence, but also it will improve our ability to critically analyze those persuasive appeals of others, and therefore not be persuaded by false or fallacious logic. So let's go ahead and jump right into Chapter 17, Persuasive Speech. And the big basic goals of persuasive speech are to reinforce or change people's attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. Some things to keep in mind: reinforce or change. That persuasion is not just about changing people's beliefs, but also reinforcing people's beliefs. Also, attitudes. These are general evaluations of people, things, ideas, and events. We may have very strong feelings about certain people or things. Good example of this, some attitudes towards guns may be very positive or may be very negative. We have beliefs, ways people perceive reality. This may be some people believe that the earth is flat, other people are right. So we have certain beliefs, not to mention we also have behavior, the ways that we act or function. So in other words, should we change our behavior or should we continue doing this behavior? And all of these things are the main goals of persuasive speeches. And when developing a thesis or a topic revelation on a persuasive speech, we have propositions of fact, value, or policy. And these adapt to our beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors respectively. So we start with beliefs, and this revolves around facts. What is or what is not. Values, what is good or bad or right or wrong, or of quality or not of quality. And then propositions of policy, things that we should do or stop doing. A good example of propositions we'll talk about it. Excellent. Let's talk about propositions of fact. Questions of fact are questions about the truth or falsity of an assertion. When analyzing these questions of fact, it is similar to an informative speech, but it's presenting a subjective view of the facts. Keep in mind that the facts may remain the same, but we can have different conclusions from those facts, and we want to be sure that we are drawing that there are actual that conclusions are being drawn from credible facts versus non-credible facts. Also, when organizing these speeches, it should be topical organization. Then we have propositions of value, which is a question about the worth, rightness, morality, and so forth of an idea or action. When analyzing questions of value, think about justifying your claim of what has value without asserting your opinion. Because when you assert your opinion, then credibility is lost. Because the general idea is that you are trying to say in this type of speech that outside of my perspective, the Xbox Series X is better than the PlayStation 5, or Apple is better than Microsoft, or Coca-Cola is better than Pepsi. Or that gun rights are important versus gun rights are not important. And we could go down the list. This, again, has topical organization. And when engaging with these, we cannot insert our opinions. And then we have questions of policy or propositions of policy, and this is the one that you are doing for your persuasive speech. A question about whether a specific course of action should or should not be taken. There are two main goals for this speech. Either passive agreement, so strengthening commitment without action, or gaining commitment to specific action. Sometimes passive agreement might be the best that we could possibly hope for, because a lot of people around elections are looking for passive agreement because we cannot vote until a certain day. Also, speeches that gain immediate action breed commitment to the cause if successful, and further motivate. I'm sure that we all know that texting and driving is bad, and that we shouldn't do it for many reasons. However, we may still engage with texting and driving, and as a result, a speech that gains immediate action might be more impactful. Also, when analyzing these questions of policy, we want to convince the audience that it is serious enough a problem that it needs to be dealt with now. Also, a plan illustrating the key features of that plan so that we know exactly what we should do. And then practicality. Show why your plan will solve the solution and why it's advantageous over other solutions. So we've talked about the three types of persuasive speeches. Now we're going to, as well as the one that you're going to do. And then also, now we're going to be discussing how to persuade an audience. As I'm sure we understand, an audience can perceive things incredibly different. Just take the same speech and show it to a Democratic person and a Republican person, and they will get completely different perspectives of that speech. So we have to understand better who our audience is, and when we do understand them better, we'll be able to better adapt our message and be able to further influence that audience. And audience disposition, audience needs, and audience relevance are the ways to do that. We start with audience disposition. This involves social judgment theory. This involves ego involvement as well as current attitudes towards the topic. So we start first with the current attitude towards the topic. That is the anchor position. So their initial feeling about the topic. Let's say that I am trying to persuade that pineapple belongs on pizza. There may be people who are on my side, and their anchor position would be for the affirmative, and the other side, the people who believe that pineapple has no place on pizza, would be on the negative. So those anchor points will determine whether or not they will be receptive or hostile. Receptive or hostile. So people on my side would be receptive, hostile audiences would not. But there is an extra component to this because it involves latitudes of acceptance and rejection. So if the audience is receptive, is on the same side as me, then they will have a latitude of acceptance. But how much and this latitude of acceptance means how many things they are going to more or less agree with me on. And this depends on whether or not they care or not. Because if, let's say, the audience doesn't care all that much, then they would have a low latitude of acceptance or rejection, whatever side that they're on. So they may not have completely established their attitudes towards this particular topic. And as a result, I can then find things outside of what they already know to further push them towards my side. Versus high latitudes, people who care a ton. That person who says, you know what, pineapple has no place on pizza, and here is why. Let me pull up this article. That person who cares a lot, that has a very high latitude, and if they're on my side, they would have a high latitude of acceptance, or if they were not on my side, they would have a high latitude of rejection. They would reject the majority of what I have to say. So how can I adapt to this? The way that I try to adapt to this is by finding those small points of contention, showing some understanding of their point of view, and then finding some small points of distinction. That way, further pushing them towards my side. But what about those person who doesn't have an idea or doesn't have any thoughts on this or doesn't care all that much? That would be a neutral audience. So, by better understanding the audience's disposition as well as how much they care, it allows for me to better strategically implement my argument. Then we have audience needs. And audience needs involve self-actualization, esteem, love and belonging, safety, and physiological needs. And all of these are within, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this can be used for our persuasive speeches because the fundamental aspect of this concept is that basic needs need to be met, physiological and safety, before those higher needs are important. Self-actualization needs, for example. So if I feel like my physiological needs or safety needs are not met, then I'm not going to care about self-actualization needs. So let's say that there is a candidate who is saying that food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, as well as security of body, of employment, of resources, of morality, of family, of health, or of property are in question. That we may and continue to enforce this narrative that these are not secure. And if the audience believes it, then they are within those safety and physiological needs. What if the other candidate says that those things are wrong, that the claims that that person is making are false? Will they be believed? Probably not, because while self-actualization, this acceptance of fact, creativity, spontaneity, problem-solving, lack of prejudice, if the physiological and safety needs the audience feels is not met, then they will not care about those self-actualization needs. Next, we move on to audience relevance. And audience relevance involves the elaboration likelihood model. Listeners process information in one of two ways, depending on the relevance of that message. So the audience should feel like it's relevant. If it is not relevant to them, then they may engage in peripheral processing, dismissing information and just making their decision based off of peripheral information. For example, that person seems pretty smart, or that person is part of my political party, so I'm going to just more or less choose them. I don't know. Or that person seems like someone I'd like to have a drink with. Versus someone who feels like it is incredibly relevant to them, that may engage in central processing, motivated by personal involvement, critical thinking, questioning, and considering. This is the more ideal choice, because while yes, it seems like it'd be a lot easier to persuade someone based off of peripheral processing, it also is not as lasting, because when someone does inevitably show why it's relevant, and then the other person, the person who engaged in peripheral processing that first time, may change their attitude, belief, or behavior. Versus central processing, where we have carefully considered, questioned, and critically thought, at that point, then we will not be as persuaded by that next argument. Now we move on to persuasive strategies. And Aristotle said it best: ethos, pathos, logos. These are very good ways to start with rhetoric. So we start with ethos. Ethos is credibility. It is the ethics of this, but it also involves the ethics of the speaker. So it is the passions or emotions of the audience. The audience it is all based entirely on the audience. So one person may have great ethos with one audience and poor ethos with another audience. Competence and expertise involves their schooling, how much they've learned about this topic, whether or not they're an expert or not. But there's more to it than that. There's also character or trustworthiness. Should they be believed? Do they have a reputation of honesty or dishonesty? And that is where a lot of politicians who have a long record may have this challenge to their character or trustworthiness if they have switched their beliefs or, well, they say evolved on their beliefs over time, as well as goodwill and caring. Whether or not you feel that they care about they have your best interests at heart. So ethos is based in these three key components. Then we have pathos. This is an appeal to emotion. We should never use it alone. Fear is only good for important threat effective speeches. For example, if a doctor says, you know what, here is why you need to stop eating the beefy Fritos burrito every night from Taco Bell because you will die. And here's a lot of expert testimony to support that you will die if you keep eating this food. That is threat effective, but it is understandable given the situation. So let's go ahead and see what emotions this appeals to. You may be able to figure it out with the title.
Yeah, my parents think I'm sleeping at your house.
Yeah, I'm just jumping in the shower. Okay, bye.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
I'm gonna try meth just once. I'm gonna smoke this just once. I'm gonna steal just once. I'm going to sleep with him for meth just once.
I'm going to try math just once.
So this is absolutely threat effective, so it's understandable. But do you think that these ads were successful? There is actually some support that it was not as successful as they thought it might be, and actually may not have been effective because it relies solely on emotional appeal, and we should never use it alone. Or else, if used too much, emotional appeals can create what's called a boomerang effect, where the person can then just automatically outright reject the emotional appeal because, well, that's just overblown. We move on to another example, a more positive example. What emotions does this appeal to? Try to find distinctiveness within this whole emotional appeal.
It's from Daddy.
I love you, baby girl. Daddy!
Hey, how are you? How's your bear?
Good.
I love you, baby girl.
Okay. Bye.
Hey, where are you going? Bye.
I'm sorry, babe. She'll come back.
Sure, it's fine. I love you, baby girl.
I miss you too.
I love you, baby girl.
Daddy! Daddy, Daddy!
The ones you trust are always there.
So, what is the pathos of this emotion? What emotions were drawn out through this commercial? First of all, it is not about emotional appeal. It is the emotional path that we take the audience down. And the vividness and the distinction throughout that path is what makes the emotion so impactful. If this, like the first one, was just one note of emotion, it is not as impactful. Versus this ad, which started as, what's going on? What's he saying to that bear? To, love you, baby girl. Oh, that's so nice. Then she's playing around with the bear. Joyous, very nice. Then the video message where, hey, I love you, baby girl. Okay, whatever, Dad. Whoa, a little bit messed up. Then she still cares about the dad until finally, oh, wait, was that the bear or was that? No, it's her dad. Oh, that's so nice. So it's about the emotional path that we take the audience down. Also, what might have been a little bit interesting at the very end was that, oh, what? It's a Duracell ad? So it speaks to the topic that if the emotional appeal isn't reflective of the topic, then it can be a bit jarring. So we want to be sure that we're avoiding that. But in classes that I have experienced up to this point, we tend to skew further towards not using enough emotion to using far too much. So we want to be sure that we're adding emotional appeal into our arguments. So now let's talk about how we generate it. How do we do it? First, using emotional language. This involves simile, metaphor, personification, parallelism, antithesis, using rhythm, using delivery, which I'll talk about. But the sort of language, that vivid language, generates this emotional response. Why is Shakespeare still taught and viewed to this day? It is not because of the stories. It is because of the language. Shakespeare uses vivid description to show what is going on, as well as the human experience through his plays. Also, he uses rhythm through iambic pentameter. So it is about the language that he uses. Also, we want to develop vivid examples. This means storytelling. Storytelling allows for the audience to see what's going on, and with description within these stories, it can generate an emotional appeal. And lastly, speak with sincerity and conviction. This involves delivery. Delivery is important with emotional appeal, and this also speaks to how ethos and pathos are kind of interconnected. Because if we communicate an emotional appeal and we speak with sincerity and conviction, the audience then feels like they can trust us. So it kind of plays into both. And lastly, we get into logos, an appeal to logic. Logic has two main components: evidence and reasoning. And we need both to do an effective logical appeal. An impactful appeal, but often overlooked to devastating effect. And when we learn more about logos, then we will be less affected by logical fallacies. So let's start with evidence, then we'll move on to reasoning. With evidence, there's some tips of where we should get evidence. Use specific evidence. In other words, concrete language instead of I think that this is what it is. So look for concrete language, not abstract language, as well as not hyperbolic language. Also, use novel evidence. Make it new to the audience that it is not evidence that they already know. Also use evidence from credible sources like New York Times versus Breitbart or wherever. Also make clear the point of your evidence. Why does this support your claim? You want to be sure that you're making clear the point of your evidence and explain why it supports what I want it to support. So, second, we have reasoning, and there are four main types. Reasoning from specific instances. This is inductive reasoning. So many different examples going to one general conclusion, and then deductive reasoning going from a general principle, which is reasoning from principle, to many different situations. Then causal reasoning, which is seeking to establish a cause and effect relationship, as well as analogical reasoning, comparing two similar cases then infer what is true of the first is also true of the second. So let's think about Santa Claus. What type of reasoning is this? And is it reasonable to believe that Santa Claus is real? Reasoning from specific instances. What are some of the particular facts that prove that Santa Claus is real? I saw him at the mall. I saw him in movies. I hear him in music. I also my friends at school told me he's real, not to mention the most credible source in my life. My parents told me that he's real. Therefore, due to all of this specific instance, all of these particular facts, I therefore now can prove that Santa Claus is indeed real. And this speaks to, is that reasonable? Absolutely. That is why evidence, credible evidence, is incredibly important, because a lot of people who believe wrong things, frankly, have incredible reasoning. Their reasoning actually may hold up, but from evidence that may not be, is not credible. Then we have reasoning from principles, and this is where we get math and science. Math and science have particular general principles that then can be brought down and applied to many specific conclusions. We have causal reasoning, cause and effect. The one challenge with this one seems pretty self-explanatory, but the issue is that a lot of times it's correlation and not causation. A good example of this could be how social media is being a cause to a lot of the social and emotional ills of those of younger generations. It could potentially be a cause and effect relationship, but there are a ton of other things, frankly, to be a little bit depressed about. So while cause and effect relationship can happen, it is a lot of times better to state it as a correlation, not a causation. And we also have analogical reasoning, which compares two similar cases and then infers what is true of the first is also true of the second. A good example of this is court. If one person does this sort of stuff and therefore gets this punishment, and this person does the same stuff, then they should also get that punishment. That is also where we see a lot of things on Facebook and other social media arguments where, this person who was of this group did this and got only this. This person from this group got this. This isn't right because these two people got different things. So that would be two different types of analogical and examples of analogical reasoning. And the last rhetorical thought, that humans are goaded by the spirit of the hierarchy and rotten with perfection, that we experience, that we are searching to reach the very top of our hierarchies. We all have hierarchies throughout our lives, areas that we are trying to be perfect at. Things like we may try to be the perfect student. We might try to be the perfect boyfriend / girlfriend. We might try to be the perfect friend. We might try to be the perfect sleeper, for that matter, or the most healthy. But we are goaded by that spirit of hierarchy and rotten with perfection. And it is impossible to reach the top of every one of these hierarchies, and as a result, we feel guilty about that. And how do we redeem this guilt? We redeem this in one of two ways: through purification by mortification, or purification by victimage. Let's say that I have the hierarchy of being excellently healthy, but then I decide to go out to Tommy's, which is a chili cheeseburger place, and I get the double chili cheeseburger with grilled onions, and the chili cheese fries with grilled onions as well. I like grilled onions. At that point, then I feel guilt about that. So I can purify it in two ways. Either mortification, I go out for a 10-mile run and I feel pretty good about myself after that. At least I did something good. Versus victimage, which is, you know what? It's not my fault. It is Steve's fault. Steve just texted me, hey, you want to go get Tommy's? And I was like, I didn't want to be rude. So I was like, you know what? Sure. So, in other words, it's about hurting ourselves, because running is hard, eating salads is hard, or whatever way I choose to mortify, or victimage, not taking responsibility and hurting someone else. It's Steve's fault. Either way, I feel redeemed from that, and therefore I feel pretty good about myself until I feel guilty about my next thing. So we can utilize this by making our audience feel guilty about something and then guiding them to either mortify. A good example of this is if I'm trying to make the audience feel guilty about global climate change, then I may choose to have them mortify by not eating beef for a week, or maybe 2 weeks, or maybe ever again. Or victimage, try to blame these people who are fighting against global climate change reform. Either way, I can make my audience feel redeemed. Now we move on to logical fallacies. Now that we understand better logic, we'll now go through some of the ways that logic can be used in we perceive to be very logical ways, but are actually logically fallacious. First, we talk about the bandwagon effect, believing that it is true because everyone else believes it or because everyone else does it. It is an appeal to people. It is saying that, you know what, that this is the right way to go because everyone believes it. #1 movie in America. That is why you have to watch Transformers: The Last Night. We also have a reduction to the absurd, or the straw man fallacy, unraveling the point to the illogical and then refuting that point. So, a good example of this would be the top image. Pollution from humans contributes to climate change because Oh, so you're saying humans then are directly responsible for extreme weather like hurricanes and have caused droughts in the southwest U.S.? So therefore, if that's the case, maybe we just need to go outside and perform a rain dance. So the person's point was that pollution is caused by humans. Then he the owl, the fallacy owl, then decided to turn that into humans cause the weather, which is, of course, illogical. Then we have the red herring, providing irrelevant information in a means to distract the other person. A good example of this is people died of cancer before cigarettes were even invented, so therefore smoking doesn't cause cancer. Just like people were run over before cars, therefore cars don't run over, therefore cars do not kill people. It doesn't really make any sense. And it's just throwing out information that doesn't really serve a purpose or doesn't really fit the topic. And then we also have a false dilemma or a false dichotomy. Either you can have clean air or clean water. You can't have both, even though there is always a middle ground. Then we have more logical fallacies, ad hominem attacks, attacking the person's character rather than the argument, to say, oh, this person is a socialist, therefore I do not need to address their question, or this person is a fascist, therefore I do not need to address their argument, instead I just have to attack them, diminishing their credibility, and therefore by social comparison I am the more credible source, so therefore they'll listen to me. We also have begging the question. People only watch True Blood because Twilight was awesome, but it doesn't really serve a purpose. It's sort of begging the question. Also, appeal to and I'll show another example of this later. Also, an appeal to tradition or the status quo, that it's always been like this, therefore it should always be like this. There's also the slippery slope or cause and effect with lack of evidence to do so. If you give a mouse a cookie, he'll want a glass of milk. If he gets a glass of milk, he'll want a place to sleep. If he wants a place to sleep, then he will stay in your house forever. And if he stays in your house forever, then the property value will go down. I don't know. That this cause and effect relationship doesn't really have a lot of evidence to support it. In the same way, back when gay marriage was a big issue, that if gay people can get married, what's next? Dogs and cats getting married? That was very much reflective of this slippery slope fallacy. In the same way, this was also the big argument in the suffragette movement. Women getting the right to vote? What's next? Dogs and cats getting the right to vote? So, of course, logical fallacy. Now we are going to bring up begging the question. This is this circular reasoning that continues to confirm itself by just continuing to state the previous claim. Stand by.
Crops is this Brondo stuff.
The Brondo's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops?
Yes.
Water? Like out the toilet?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be out of the toilet, but yeah, that's the idea.
But Brondo's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
Okay, look. The plants aren't growing, so I'm pretty sure that the Brondo's not working. Now, I'm no botanist, but I do know that if you put water on plants, they grow.
Well, I've never seen no plants grow out of no toilet.
Hey, that's good. You sure you ain't the smartest guy in the world?
Yeah.
So let's go back.
Okay, look, you want to solve this problem. I want to get my pardon, so why don't we just try it, okay? And not worry about what plants crave.
Brondo's got what plants crave.
Yeah, it's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brondo.
Yeah, but why did they use them to make Brondo?
Because Brondo's got electrolytes.
There we go. Okie doke. So, as you can see, there is this circular reasoning of it's got what plants crave. Well, that's got electrolytes, and so on and so forth. So this is the begging the question. Next, we talk about an appeal to novelty. New is always better. That's why we need to buy the iPhone 15 because the 14 is out of date. Also, we have a hasty generalization, a jump to a conclusion with lack of evidence to do so. So this is where we are just jumping to another conclusion, even though we don't have the evidence for it. Also, we have a false cause, and assumes that because one event follows another, that the first event caused the second event. And then lastly, an invalid analogy. Two cases are being compared even though they are not alike. Okay, we've talked about the logical fallacies. Now we jump into problem, cause, solution, organization, which is the organization that we are going to be using for our speech. So we have the introduction and conclusion with the necessary components. I'm not going to be discussing that. The main thing that I'm going to be discussing is the main points. Problem, cause, solution. The first main point is the problem. The second main point is the cause of the problem. The third main point is the solution to the problem. So what we do in the problem is we include clear definitions of any terms, provide history, impact, and reasons why it's a problem. Or we could even go into what are the negative effects, or problem that the problem in general is that the solution has not been implemented. So what are the negative effects of that? Or we can then go into the causes of the problem, detail why the problem even exists. Who created the problem, what happened to create it, and how did this problem even happen? Then you could also explain what are some of the reasons why this solution is not being implemented right now. What is causing this thing to not be solved? And then lastly, you propose a solution. This involves fully describing what your solution would be, determine what the listeners would have to do to be a part of the solution, and even list all the things that need to be accomplished to achieve this solution. Or you could go through even what are some of the benefits of this solution. So you could, in theory, if it fits your topic, make one of these or make some of these your subpoints for the main point, that is the problem. So we are going to watch a great persuasive speech that involves the problem, cause, solution, organization. I'm going to be pausing throughout, but this is going to help us.
On a chilly November night 2 years ago, a Ford Explorer was charging down a California highway. The 16-year-old driver and 3 of his friends were returning from a concert in Los Angeles. These young people were good students, gifted athletes, talented artists and musicians, and none were drunk or impaired by drugs. They were, however, driving too fast, and the driver lost control of the car. The car went into a ditch and hit a tree. The driver and 1 passenger were killed. The other 2 passengers escaped with severe injuries. One of these passengers was my nephew. Today he is finishing high school in a wheelchair he will occupy for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, tragic auto accidents involving teenage drivers are much too common in all parts of the United States. After researching the subject for my speech, I have come to the same conclusion as the experts, that the best way to prevent such accidents is to raise the age for full driving privileges to 18 or older. I know from my audience analysis questionnaire that most of you oppose such a plan. But I also know from my questionnaire that most of you recognize that 16 and 17-year-old drivers are less skilled and less responsible than older drivers. So I ask you to listen with an open mind while we discuss some of the problems associated with teenage driving, some of the major causes of the problems, and a plan that will go a long way towards solving some of the problems.
So this is her introduction. Very well done to begin with. She starts off with a story of someone being affected by this problem, and also goes through her credibility, that she agrees with the experts, and she also talks about personal relevancy, that she has already given a survey to her audience showing here's what are all of the issues regarding, that you believe that teenage drivers should still be able to drive, but you also feel that they are not as qualified of drivers as older people. So so she has shown relevance as well as her goodwill towards the audience, taking their perspective and then developing it. We continue.
No matter how one looks at the evidence, it all leads to one fact. There are too many motor vehicle accidents, deaths, and injuries involving teenage drivers. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, while teenagers make up 7% of the nation's licensed drivers, they represent 14% of all motor vehicle fatalities. The NHTSA reports that last year, 3,657 drivers aged 16 to 20 were killed in automobile accidents. In addition to killing the drivers, these same accidents took the lives of 2,384 teenage passengers. But these accidents didn't affect teenagers alone. They also took the lives of 2,625 people aged 21 or older. So the total number of people killed last year in automobile accidents involving teenage drivers was 8,666, almost exactly the number of full-time students at this campus.
So she not only brings up this statistic from a reputable source, but then also puts it in human terms, that it's as many people as as many people as are on her campus. We continue.
Evidence also shows that the younger the driver, the greater the risk. According to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, 16-year-olds have the highest percentage of crashes involving speeding, the highest percentage of single vehicle crashes, and the highest percentage of crashes involving driver error. Moreover, as USA Today reports, 16-year-olds are 3 times more likely to be involved in fatal crashes than our older drivers. Now that we've seen the extent of the problem, we can explore its causes.
So now she has explicitly transitioned from the problem to the cause. Something else to note within this, that with this problem and cause, with the problem, she has detailed the extent of the problem and talked about the negative effects. By focusing on the negative effects of the solution not being implemented, it is providing exigence. It is providing a need to change. We continue.
One of the causes is inexperience. New drivers just haven't had enough time on the road to develop their driving skills. But inexperience is far from the only cause of the problem. After all, there will always be inexperienced drivers, even if the driving age is raised to 21 or even to 25. A second cause is revealed by brain research. Findings from the National Institute of Mental Health show that the brain of an average 16-year-old has not developed to the point where he or she is able to effectively judge the risk of a given situation. Dr. Jay Geed, who led the research team that conducted the study, states, when a smart, talented, very mature teen does something that a parent might call stupid, it's this underdeveloped part of the brain that has most likely failed. Stephen Lowenstein, a medical professor at the University of Colorado, has just finished a 5-year study comparing the traffic records of 16-year-old drivers to drivers aged 25 to 49. His conclusion? Deliberate risk-taking and dangerous and aggressive driving behaviors predominated among the 16-year-olds. A third cause of motor vehicle fatalities among teenage drivers is night driving. According to the Washington Post,
I'm going to pause just there for 1 second. So she first starts off with something that is incredibly relevant and really, I think, improves her credibility with her audience. That she states that one is just a lack of experience, but there will always be those who are not experienced. So she is already bringing up arguments that could run against her side. So she then puts that to the side and then discusses that even so, teens are more susceptible. And also that what's her second subpoint? Teens are underdeveloped. And that is an incredibly big claim to make. And because of that, she brings in expert testimony from highly credible sources and then explains how that proves her point. So it is something to keep in mind that when we do have those big claims, that we need solid support as well as reasoning to support those claims. We continue.
when 16-year-olds get behind the wheel of a car after dark, the likelihood of having an accident increases several times over. Of course, nighttime driving is less safe for everyone, but it becomes particularly dangerous when combined with a young driver's inexperience and reduced ability to gauge risk. Finally, there is the presence of teenage passengers in the car. We all know what it's like to drive with our friends. The stereo's up loud, cell phones are ringing, everybody's laughing and having a good time. The problem is that all these factors create distractions. Distractions that too often result in accidents, injury, and death. Alan Williams, chief scientist at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, reports that one teenage passenger doubles the risk of a fatal crash. With 2 or more passengers, the risk is 5 times greater. Remember my nephew's accident I mentioned at the start of my speech? There were 3 passengers in the car. So
she brings up her personal experience again. This creates credibility for herself, but also acts as this need-to-know information that by engaging with her personal experience with it, it builds her credibility and is this extra bit of information to drive engagement and also provides relevancy, because if it has affected me, it can affect you too.
the extent of the problem is clear. So too are its causes.
And then she transitions.
What steps can we take to help bring about a solution? First, we need a national policy that no one can receive a learner's permit until age 16, and no one can receive full driving privileges until age 18. This will allow 16-year-olds time to gain driving experience before having an unrestricted license, and to reach a stage of brain development where they are better able to handle the risk and responsibility of driving. Second, we need to restrict nighttime driving so as to keep younger drivers off the road when conditions are riskiest. Some states have tried to address this problem by banning teenagers from driving after midnight or 1 a.m. But as the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety reports, these laws don't go far enough. According to the Institute, we need a 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. limit until drivers reach the age of 18. Third, we need to restrict the number of teenage passengers in cars driven by younger drivers. In fact, says Kevin Quinlan from the National Transportation Safety Board, passenger restriction is the first and foremost measure you can take to reduce teenage driving fatalities. According to Quinlan, the optimal policy would be to bar drivers age 17 or younger from having any passengers in the car unless the riders are adults or family members. Drivers from the age of 17 to 18 should not be allowed to carry more than 1 teenage passenger. Now, I know all of this might sound harsh and perhaps inconvenient, But the evidence is clear that it would save a significant number of lives. If you want to discuss harsh, said one father whose 17-year-old son died in an accident 3 years ago, I can talk to you about harsh. It's being awakened at 2:30 in the morning by the State Patrol, telling you that your son has just been killed.
So she could have very easily fallen into the trap of saying teenage drivers should not be able to drive. But she instead, and what we should do as well, provide a solid, specific plan of what the audience should do or the policy that the audience should try to implement. And she gets this policy from the experts. I'm sure that we all know a great deal about the topic that we will choose to do for our persuasive speech, but there will always be someone who knows more, and we can find those people and use their words in our speech to improve the quality of our persuasive appeal. That being said, she also then goes into an emotional appeal. You want to talk about harsh? Imagine being woke up at 2 a.m. in the morning by the highway patrol saying your son has just been killed. The reason why she does this is because emotional appeals are incredibly impactful. And if we just avoid them entirely, then we will diminish the quality of our persuasive appeal. I know that sometimes emotional appeals are seen as less than logical appeals, but emotions tend to affect us a lot more than we would care to admit. So we want to be sure that we are using them in our speeches. We continue.
Everyone in this room has lived to college age. But this year alone, thousands of teenage drivers will not live that long. And they won't live that long due to factors that we can prevent. There's no way to solve all the problems we encounter on the road. But we can do something to help save the lives of younger drivers and make the roads safer for all of us. As I said earlier, this might sound harsh or inconvenient, but I know my nephew would gladly trade both for the chance to walk again.
And then she ends with a very good concluding statement. So she did a lot of things very well. This was a problem, cause, solution organization. She used a lot of logos, a lot of ethos, and a lot of pathos. And we can use all three to improve the quality of our speeches as well. And with that, that concludes today's lecture. Have a great rest of your day.